responsibilities. Leela Evans was officially, sworn in as the Minister responsible for women and gender equality. The portfolios on Evans' desk also include health and community services, mental health and addictions, Minister responsible for NL Health Services, Labrador Affairs, Indigenous Relations, and Reconciliation. To talk about this appointment and how it will get attention given the other responsibilities Leela Evans has, which are significant. We are joined by the former Minister of Women and Gender Equality, who also had additional ministerial roles, and the the MHA for Portagrave, Pam Parsons. Pam, I don't think I've ever seen the portfolio as a standalone portfolio since it has existed in Newfoundland and Labrador. Has it?
Not to my knowledge, Tim, but as you mentioned, it was a standalone portfolio when I served in the role. It continued to be a standalone portfolio when my colleague Sherry Gaiman-Walsh. But I can also remember going back to the Dwight Ball government, it was a standalone portfolio with Minister Carol Ann Haley as well when she served in that role.
And look, I am not challenging Leela Evans' skills or intellect or anything like that. She's obviously an extremely capable individual. The Premier has entrusted her with health. My question to you and many other key responsibilities, Minister responsible for women and gender equality is a big job. I mean, here today we're also talking about, Georgina's law and what's happening in the Senate and some of the key act work that's being done there to address intimate partner violence. How difficult is it going to be for Minister Evans, among her other key responsibilities, to focus on this based on your experience trying to lead this department?
Well, absolutely. And first and foremost, I want to say that my colleague, Minister Evans, it's not about her. It's not about the individual, because she is indeed a strong woman and capable, of course, of being a good cabinet minister. But it's her load is very, very heavy. I mean, health and community services alone was always a standalone, as far as I can remember, and it needs to be. It is the biggest expenditure in government. Most of the provincial budget is health and community services. And as you know, Tim, we are going through a time of transition. We introduced the Health Accord with Dr. Pat Parfrey and Sister Elizabeth Davis. We know that the delivery of health care has to change. It has to modernize, and that's what was in the process of happening under Dr. Pat Parfrey. And that needs a lot of focus. I mean, on the campaign trail, just fresh off the trail, back in October, we know that healthcare was the first and foremost. Healthcare and cost of living are the two most significant priorities that I've heard as an MHA with constituents. So I think health alone deserves its own designated minister and a very, very, very strong staff within that department with deputies and even assistant deputy ministers. But she also has the portfolio of Indigenous and Reconciliation, Indigenous Affairs Reconciliation, Labrador Affairs, and now Women and Gender Equality. Women and Gender Equality, the number of stakeholders alone that I met with as minister and what I dealt with, it was significant. And I mean, there are a number of things, initiatives, and you and I have talked about this before. Our government introduced the Reconciliation Council that was called for by the Indigenous women of Newfoundland and Labrador, and what that consists of Indigenous women leaders across the province, the entire province, as well as government officials. Is that council going to continue? Because that was one of the calls of justice that came from the National Inquiry for missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls. And Tim, Labrador alone has the highest rates of intimate partner violence and deaths, higher than the national average. So, I mean, these are all very serious portfolios that require significant attention. And unfortunately, I'm very concerned about the load that this minister will be carrying.
Yeah, and again, Leela Evans would well know the numbers in Labrador. She's a proud Labradorian and an empathetic individual. And I just want to reiterate, we're not going after her. I'm not going after her personally.
No.
What's fascinating for me too, Pam, I think it was only last week, I was talking to one of the wonderful advocates who works in the intimate partner violence space, and they were reminding us, again, there's a crisis here. When there's a crisis in something, particularly as pronounced as intimate partner violence, you need the time to focus on it, don't you?
Well, absolutely. And I mean, I remember the opposition were calling for our government to actually formally label intimate partner violence as a crisis. And I mean, we've been on record calling it a crisis and referring to it as a crisis because it is a crisis, and not just in our jurisdiction here of Newfoundland and Labrador, but across the province and ultimately the world. We see what happens, especially to women in other countries. But again, something, Tim, very important to highlight. This was a former status of women portfolio, but that mandate has also been expanded to include the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. So it's women and gender equality. So again, it's an expanded mandate for the portfolio, and Premier Wakeham boasted that he was going to slim down the cabinet, but slimming down the cabinet, I don't think they're doing it justice to these portfolios because a number of them are doubled up. But that said, the big expenditure was $275,000 for a political advisor that's been taken from MCP. I mean, that kind of goes against, he's contradicting his own words here when it comes to smarter spending. But that's another issue in itself.
Story.
But
let me ask you this, though. Let me ask you this one, Pam. You know the advocates, you know the stakeholders. So Helen Conway Ottenheimer, equally a very capable person, had the role briefly in the Wakeham government. The Wakeham government's only been in power for 3-4 months now, and the portfolio's moved to Minister Evans. What does that say to the stakeholders and the people who are fighting hard to make legislative change about a government's commitment to it if it moves around as often as that?
Well, again, I'm going to go back to the words used by the current premier. He had a lot of criticism, actually, for when John Hogan took on the portfolio of health and community service just temporarily when the minister at the time was out for personal reasons, for health reasons, and that drew a lot of criticism from members of the opposition, saying it's not a justice to the people of the province. They alarmed about how it needs a full focus. So I mean, again, I think this is what we're seeing so far in their performance, where this is an administration that their own words are going to be used against them. They expressed the urgency when they saw this portfolio doubled up in the past, but now they're doing it. And I mean, but again, who is going to suffer here? It's the people, the stakeholders of the province. And yes, there are a lot of stakeholders. I mean, you've got pay equity under women and gender equality. You've got intimate partner violence. I also signed on to the National Action Plan agreement with the federal government. And again, you've got the whole economic side of it as well, with venture capitals and supporting women in business and gender diverse people. So it's much bigger than just one or two items in women and gender equality. And given what we're seeing around the world and the regression that we're seeing, unfortunately, with our neighbors in the United States, now is not the time to be cutting back and literally giving just a quarter of a space, giving the space of a corner on a desk, for this one portfolio. It speaks volumes about the priority, unfortunately, and I mean, I'm not surprised, but at the same time, I'm hoping that the Premier is going to reconsider this. I actually called for him to reconsider this when they first introduced their cabinet, but I would say to stakeholders, keep up the good work. I mean, these people in those positions, they are the real champions. They're on the front lines. They know what what people are needing, and again, unfortunately, there's a need. A lot of people within these stakeholders, they're coming looking for help, and oftentimes we know their lives are at risk, what they're facing with intimate partner violence, etc.
Yeah, there is a lot at stake. I got to leave it there, Pam. Thanks for your time today. Good to talk to you.
Thank you, Tim. Take good care.
All right, then.